Okay, good morning. And on behalf of the Institute of Advanced Studies in Warsaw and Political Critique, I am very happy to welcome you here today at this conference on culture and development. This time we are being hosted by two institutions in the Warsaw district of Prague, the Zygmunt Hübner Theater and Komuna Warszawa, where tonight there will be a performance accompanying the conference. I have drawn more than you can see. It is a show by Strefa Wolnosłowa. The Culture and Development Program has been run at our institute since 2012, when Professor Jerzy Hausner began a seminar under that name. And that seminar is still being run at the Institute. Lecturers alongside Jerzy Hausner include Igor Stokfiszewski and Dr. Mikołaj Lewicki and Dr. Świętochowska. The Culture and Development Program does not consist entirely of seminars. It's also a research program, an academic program. In 2013 and 2014, there was a large nationwide study for which we gained funds from the Ministry of Culture and National Heritage. And so, at the then ministry, of course, since then the political situation in Poland has changed greatly. The findings, the outcome of the study and process of the study has been presented at two previous conferences, and finally, and I'm very gratified to say that we have managed to publish a book, Culture and Development, a paper, Culture and Development, Recommendations and Case Studies, edited by Jerzy Hausner, Igor Stokfiszewski, Mikołaj Lewicki, and myself. And this year, just before the conference, Igor Stokfiszewski has produced an e-book, Culture and Development, Beyond Neoliberal Reasoning. And this brings us to the third conference, during which we will be presenting the main findings of this four-year program. The findings will be presented in three thematic panels: the culture ecosystem, and the ecosystem of European values, and the ecosystem of cultural policies. I'm very much looking forward to this session, to the whole day, to what our guests have to say. We're all practitioners, organizers, artists, and people who work with culture on a day-to-day basis, and you're all very much encouraged to take part in the discussion. Thank you very much. Paweł Łysak, the director of the Zygmunt Hübner Powszechny Theater in Warsaw, our host. Good morning and welcome. I'm very happy that our theater can host this conference. I'm very happy to have so many of you here today. I want to say that this is the seagull, this is the set for the seagull, Cracow, which explains the strange look, and be careful you don't get your foot stuck in the rails. And I also wanted to say that in Teatr Powszechny on November 18th and 19th this year, there will be an international conference that will be a conference meeting to commemorate the anniversary of the Culture Congress that was co-organized by our theater in October of last year. We want to take it a step further. The conference will be about new ideas in culture, and I wanted to make that announcement today and invite all of you to attend. Thank you very much. And this conference is the first in a series of conferences on culture and development that is fully international, and it was planned and programmed as such. This is due to the fact that for 3 years now, Political Critique is part of the European Culture Foundation, or has been supported by the European Culture Foundation, which invited us to Connected Action for the Commons, a network of 6 organizations and institutions in the field of culture, social entrepreneurship, democracy in various European countries. And in that respect, this conference is special, is unique, owing to it's thanks to our cooperation with the European Culture Foundation. We could compare our findings with an international setting, an international background, and the European environment. I'd like to thank Catherine Watson, the director of the European Culture Foundation, for this very generous and enriching cooperation. I'd also like to thank her for coming here today and for taking part in our conference, and I'd like to hand it over to her.
Thank you, Igor. 4 years ago, the European Cultural Foundation embarked on a new plan under the title of Culture, Connecting Culture, Communities, and Democracy. We had an idea at that time, 4 years ago, to move away to a certain degree from funding projects, from being a donor who was supporting project ideas, albeit excellent ideas, to encouraging and enabling and working with a community of practice. And this is the community of practice connected action for the commons that Igor has mentioned. We set out to, with a trajectory that started with identifying those organizations who we thought might be part of that, connecting, nurturing, and illuminating. So very, very big words. Within the idea of we needed to be bigger than ourselves, and that our work and the work that we were supporting sought to do that, to be bigger than the core task at hand, and that the cultural process that people were involved in was contributing to something much larger in society. So hence your also very appropriate link between culture and development, although I think we will talk a lot about those two words in the coming hours. And I think the intersecting rings of the poster that you have is a very compelling one and strikes very much to the heart of what we were trying to do. It's this intersection between ideas, these intersection between sectors, this intersection between cultures, intersection between disciplines, intersection between generations. It's that exciting space where those intersections happen that is the dynamic place of where change can actually happen in our societies as well. So we set out to find how we could start to bring together an inclusivity of different perspectives to allow for a community of practice that was really looking at the intersection of the connection between culture and society, or society as culture, culture as society. And while I think ECF can take some responsibility for the seed of an idea, for maybe the identifying part of the partners, the hubs in the network, certainly the rest, the connecting, nurturing, and illuminating is very much a shared one. And that is what makes this collectivity, this ecosystem, really an interdependent one. So it is very much an honor and a privilege to be here, and also to thank Igor, Joanna, and all of the Kritika Polityczna team for the work that you have done and the active participation in this action research initiative that is Connected Action for the Commons. The arch of today steps from culture, the ecosystem of culture, to cultural policies, to Europe. And Igor had suggested perhaps a few remarks about the research and policy challenges in relation to the intersection of culture and society on a European level. Would be an interesting way to start the day, a rather existential question, I think, and something that, because of the times we live in and the challenges both local, national, European, and global, we are confronted daily. All of the millions of people that live around us, our communities, our governments, our policymakers, are confronted with the who am I, the identity questions, what is Europe, and then the corollary or the conundrum that is on the other side of that, can one actually leave something like Europe? I won't get into the details of the Brexit and so on, but it is that very basic understanding of how do we describe ourselves, and most importantly, what is the relevance of that in the world. I wanted, if you'll just allow me a bit of a crystallized personal odyssey. I'm a European by citizenship and by residency. Home for me right now is a European city. By heritage, I'm also European, but of those Europeans who left Europe to a new world, to a promise of a new future of, to bring back the word, development and developing, all too often fleeing an old world of rejection, exclusion, inequality, persecution, pain, and sorrow. I was born and raised in that new world, but shaped by, I truly believe, Europeanness, moving, curious, eclectic, complicated, complex. European Cultural Foundation and myself were about the same age. So as an institution, we're baby boomers who across Europe, that generation, are facing global challenges, huge demographic shifts, change on all fronts, economic and social global pressures, and speed of change, and the reductionist reactions to that change and the solutions that are being proposed around us that are not solutions we would necessarily adhere to, but the easy solutions, the simplification of very complex and very rich situations and identities. So how can policy possibly keep up with this and the speed of change? And research by its very nature takes time, reflection requires inclusive perspective, and the future demands, it urgently needs a change, and this is what today is about. Culture is the space within which that change can happen, and it is happening. And it's not about European culture, which I think is linked to an identity question, nor is it about culture in Europe, which is a geography, which is a framing, but culture for Europe, and our connection that will our connected action that will realize that. For me, Europe is this dynamic, moving, and dare I say, developing interlocal mesh of cultural action. And I'm very happy to be here and look forward to the conversations for the rest of the day.
Bardzo serdecznie dziękuję.
Thank you very much. And now, at the beginning, Izabela Jasińska mentioned the role played by Professor Jerzy Hausner in defining the Culture and Development Program at the Institute of Advanced Studies in Warsaw. So I won't repeat what she said, and now I can only thank Professor Hausner for the trust, for the tutelage, for the supervision over this program, and ask him to say a few words. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My introductory remarks will summarize the experience that Iza Jasińska mentioned and allow me to strike a personal tone. In the second decade of the 21st century, we have a poignant feeling of a profound crisis, the collapse of the world we know as we know it, living in post-reality, in post-truth, the lack of an ambitious, grand project. But this poignancy brings opportunities as well as threats, especially when the search for something new is to be a new ideology that would lead to a new totalitarianism. If we want to, this threat not to, we need to look at culture linked to development, a culture linked to other systems and areas, as Catherine Watson said. But in our approach to culture, we still tend to think in terms of status and not process. In Poland, this is the prevailing approach. Therefore, we look at established, ossified forms of cultural activity. We call them cultural institutions in Poland. We look at culture as a sector. It is here that the collapse occurred, that the problems occurred. And if we want there to be a profound social and institutional change, we need to realize that this change will not occur within the institutional framework, but must come from outside this established and ossified system, petrified, and therefore we must go beyond that which controls and stabilizes reality. We must turn towards living culture. That was the main idea when we decided to turn to look at the flashpoints, the focal points of living culture, vital culture. We wanted to show how these flashpoints work, how they're fueled, what allies, what opponents they have, what can they say, what can they achieve, what is the image contained in our book. And here, let me quote. The conclusion is that at first glance, if we take the wide view, if we see the big picture, we see that these hot points in culture do not transform Poland, but that's not due to their scarcity, but to their weakness and their lack of potential for development. They're islands on an ocean of routine, and as such they do not promote social development. But if we look at these islets from close up, if we come closer to them, we see that what is going on somehow does radiate, or might radiate. It has the energetic potential, or it can open up new paths for development. And even though these paths are narrow and tangled, if they start intersecting and connecting, they will lead to a change that enables development. We said that about 2 years ago, calling for the role of institutions such as the Institute of Advanced Studies and Political Critique to combine, to link these islands into an archipelago. This is a cognitive and active program. It's not just about knowledge, it's about following through on that knowledge, following up on that knowledge. And we have a diagram for change. Cultural initiatives, these flashpoints, these islands, as we call them, then creation of a system of islands, an archipelago. And here I'm looking at Edwin Bendik because we decided in October to convene, to bring together all these islands and decide how this archipelago is to be created. But we to initiate, to encourage a social movement that would transform citizen consumers into citizens participating in development and facilitate or lead to social change. But that's not the way it works. You need to be aware that it's not working out. And yet I want to recall that the basic premise here was to retain the autonomy and subjectivity and the empowerment. And in terms of subjectivity, empowerment, we have said in the preface to the book that subjectivity needs to be related, needs to be connected to creating values. And this is of fundamental importance. And at the same time, this subjectivity, this empowerment that creates values can't be inward-looking, can't be isolated. It must be subjectivity in cooperation, in partnership, joint creation of values. The thought that it's a personal thought, it's a personal remark that I'm expanding upon here, although it is the product of a collective experience. we won't find strength in culture alone, but in its ties to other walks of human, other areas of human activity. And let me reiterate what Isa said. It's not just about filling in, fleshing out these areas with culture, saturating them with culture, but to find points of reference, these crucial elements in which cooperation is necessary. There are three such fundamental areas. First of all, a collective search on how to use development potential and use resources that are exploited. We have a lot of resources that are sidelined, that are excluded, that aren't included. Reaching out to them, bringing them in, and achieving one's potential. Second, we need to create and jointly create values, even if we think in terms of economic value. Even these can't be created without creating other values. And let's not confuse value with profit. This isn't economic thinking. It's not that if it doesn't have a price, it doesn't have a value. And we also need to stimulate an all-encompassing kind of development, a sustainable development, and a mechanism that would serve to multiply and increase these values, these resources, especially so-called human capital. And if this is to succeed, and only if we succeed in this, we'll be able to define the actors, the agents that will achieve fundamental social change. So what we're doing in culture must invoke other areas, and this is what I'm working on. I'm working on business, entrepreneurship, companies, cities, and schools. The point is always to identify, when talking about these three fundamental ways of organizing social life, to define what is specific for each of these, for each university, for each city, for each company, how it can create value. And that this process will not be continued, will not be possible without some sort of community that underpins the whole process. And this is what we in Cracow called a different approach, a different POV. The point is to look for the ability to jointly create values, and by which we mean existential and anthropological values and not instrumental values. In closing, let me quote Edwin Bendik, whom I addressed already, saying that we were supposed to go to Krasnogruda, a think tank, and Edwin said, the gist of the problem is to translate grassroots new mechanisms of creating value into a system that would generate and disseminate knowledge, thereby achieving a change in governance. And that's the goal we should all have. We must turn towards a shared creation of values to show that it's possible, that it generates new knowledge, and that will open the road to change. Thank you very much. And now the third conference, Culture and Development, is now officially open. Katherine Watson and Jerzy Hausner will be speaking again in the last panel. Paweł Łysak will stay where he is. We will be beginning our panel on the ecosystem of culture, and thanks to Jasińska for opening the conference.